All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wes Rades, Bay Nature's Executive Director, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Bay Nature Talk with Julie Woodruff about northern saw-whet owls, tiny, elusive birds that are surprisingly common, but incredibly difficult to see. If you're meeting us for the first time, Bay Nature is a nonprofit independent media organization devoted to environmental journalism in the San Francisco Bay Area. We publish Bay Nature magazine and host events like this to bring our reporting to life. Bay Nature Talks are all about connecting you directly with the people behind the knowledge, scientists, naturalists, and writers, so that you can go deeper into the stories we cover. Today's talk is based on our recent Bay Nature story, The Tiniest Owl You've Never Seen, which follows Julie and a team of volunteers into the hills of Pepperwood Preserve as they band and study northern saw-whet owls. These palm-sized birds are among our most mysterious local residents, secretive, nocturnal, and still surprisingly little studied in the western United States. For the past 8 years, Julie's been working to change that. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. If you experience any technical difficulties, don't worry. This webinar is being recorded and we'll send you a link afterward. And if you have any questions during the talk, please enter them into the chat. We'll get to as many of them as we can after the presentation. We also want to make sure to thank those of you who made a donation to support today's program. More than half of Bay Nature's funding each year comes from community support, and your generosity makes events like this possible. If you're inspired today, we invite you to donate or to become a member at baynature.org. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Julie Woodruff, who I'll bring on screen with me now. Julie's a biologist based in Santa Rosa and a senior wildlife biologist with ACOM. She has more than 16 years of experience banding northern saw-whet owls and other bird species in California. For the past 8 years, she's operated 2 permitted saw-whet banding stations at the Pepperwood Preserve in Sonoma County and at Las Trampas Wilderness Regional Preserve in the East Bay, in a largely self-funded, volunteer-powered effort to better understand these remarkable birds. Today, Julie's going to take us behind the scenes of that work, what it takes to find and safely band a bird that most of us will never see in the wild, what she's learning about saw-whet migration in the Bay Area, and maybe even why these little adorable owls occasionally earn the nickname Devil Spawn. Julie, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Great. Thanks so much for that great introduction, Wes. And thank you everyone for showing up today and being here to hear me talk about northern saw-whet owls. It's been kind of a passion project for the last 8 years, as Wes mentioned. So I'm really happy I can share some results and some facts about these mysterious little guys. So yeah, let me get started. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So yeah, the article, The Tiniest Owl You'll Never See, Northern Saw-whet Owl Banding in the Bay Area, California. So today I'm going to talk to you about northern saw-whet owl ecology. Just some basic biology facts about these owls, why we care about them since they're relatively common, like why are we doing this research? I'm going to talk about Project OwlNet, my study methods, so how I'm doing the work I'm doing out there. I'm going to dive into some results from banding from 2018 to 2025, future research and where the project is headed, and then I'm going to talk about a little bit of MODIS research that's going to be integrated soon. All right, northern saw-whet owls, scientific name Aegolia cicaticus. They're one of the smallest owls in North America. You can see from this illustration by David Allen Sibley that they have overall, they're small owl. They have no ear tufts. They have kind of bright yellow eyes. Their chest is white streaked with chestnut, and their backs are chestnut or dark brown with white spots. Their size ranges from 75 to 95 grams, with females being on the larger end, which is just slightly bigger than an American robin. Females are larger, as typical with many raptor species, and their sex is determined through a combination of measurements adapted from a study conducted by Brinker in the 90s. They inhabit forested regions of North America. Oops. As you can see, this range map here, purple is year-round territory, including where the Bay Area is. the boreal forests of North America. Non-breeding area is parts of the Intermountain West, the Great Plains, and then where they winter basically, and then they can winter down in the southern United States. These guys migrate seasonally, so in the fall they migrate in large numbers from higher latitudes and elevations down into lower latitudes and elevations, and they migrate back in the spring. This photo is a clutch of juvenile saw-whet owls that have recently fledged. So as you can see, they don't look like adults yet. They look definitely different. Before they migrate, they will molt into their adult plumage. So they'll lose that kind of solid chestnut and teddy bear looking face, and they'll look like the adult that you saw in the illustration before. These guys are obligate cavity nesters, so they need either a natural cavity excavated by something like a woodpecker or like a broken tree branch, or they'll use nest boxes. Their broods include clutches of 5 eggs on average. They can be up to 7 or as few as 2 or 3. Incubation lasts between 27 and 29 days. And these guys hatch asynchronously. So the first egg that was laid will start hatching. So there'll be different ages in the nest box at the same time. So one chick might be quite a bit bigger than the oldest chick might be quite a bit bigger than the youngest chick. The male brings the female all the food during incubation and during brooding until the female leaves the nest, which is about just about 18 days or almost 3 weeks. They eat primarily mice and rodents, occasionally large insects, probably moths and things that you can't really see in pellets. But primarily rodents. After the brood leaves the nests, they're fed for about a month. The brood sticks together. As you can see from this picture, they are all together. So the male is able to find them easily. These guys have about 10 different vocalizations, from high-pitched squeaks to alarm shrieks and barks and guttural sounds. And then they have a tooting sound that is repetitive and will go on for hours and hours during the breeding season by the male to attract a female during the breeding season. Their distinctive tooting reminded folks of a saw being sharpened when these guys were being named, so hence the common name, saw-whet owl. So why do we care about northern saw-whet owls? Well, these species was considered rare for many, many years prior to bird banding, documenting them moving in large scale, I guess, large scale flocks, I guess you could say, during migration. These guys are rodent specialists, so they provide natural pest control and ecosystem stability. They're an indicator species, so declines in their population may signify habitat loss or degradation. They're a really great species for scientific research due to their widespread migration patterns and ability to be banded in large numbers. And they're also really great for public outreach. They are small and charming, as you can tell by photos, and it provides opportunities for public outreach and wildlife protection. Despite being common, their ecology in Northern California and the Bay Area is still poorly understood, despite them breeding and overwintering here. And I bet most folks haven't even ever seen one before, unless it was in the hand or you're very, very lucky. All right, so now I'm going to talk about Project Owlnet. Project Owlnet is a collaborative network including over 120 current owl banding stations across North America, including Canada. Our project that I've been working on is part of this effort. Depending on the banding station's latitude, there are projects attempting to band saw-whet owls or other migratory owl species such as long-eared owls, boreal owls, flammulated owls, barred owls, etc., from the end of September to the end of November annually during migration season. Some stations also participate in spring migration banding, but that migratory window is, in general, much more difficult to predict. One of the goals of Project Owlnet is to standardize how data is collected for owl stations, such as remaining active for a specific number of years, type of data collected, such as age, weight, sex ratios, weather, for more broad geographic comparisons. Additionally, more stations opens mean there's a higher chance of capturing an owl that was banded elsewhere and be able to make those connections about where these guys are moving from. They have 3 overarching goals. One is to support the continuing expansion of a network of migrant owl banding stations. They advocate for the use of standardized comparable netting protocols, and to improve communication and coordination among owl migration research stations in North America and beyond. On the actual Saw-whet net listserv, where the banding station leaders only have access to, there are published protocols, monitoring guidance, publications, and communications that all of us researchers are able to share with each other for successful seasons. If you're interested in learning about Project OwlNet yourself, the website is projectowlnet.org. So this map illustrates all of the current and former banding stations that have registered with Project OwlNet. This map is current as of this past winter. So you can see right off the bat that there are a lot more stations concentrated back east. That's where Project OwlNet started in Pennsylvania, and it kind of expanded from there. And out here west, we're still playing catch up. And you can see with this arrow, that's where our site is, Bay Area, for context. I started my owl banding journey up in Chico, which is in Northern California there, and then a couple additional stations from other folks who started in Chico also have also opened. So one up on the coast and one at Mount Lassen. But you can see from this map that it's important, to try to have an effort at all in the west to just be able to catch up with the ecology of the species out here versus back east. So getting to the study questions, is there a northern saw-whet owl migration in or throughout the Bay Area? Are saw-whet owls in the Bay Area migratory, or are they resident? Since the range map has them here, shows them as being here full-time, essentially year-round. What is the timing and the magnitude of the saw-whet owl migration, if present, in the Bay Area? And what are the demographics of the migratory populations? So I'll talk about my study sites. I started this project in 2018, kind of a pilot year at Briones Regional Park. That's kind of out by Lafayette, Concord, in the East Bay, on East Bay Parks land. I received my research permits through the bird banding lab with United States Geological Service, the CDFW, and East Bay Parks. And the Briones year was great, but it was kind of hard to access, and we had to kind of lug all of our gear in by hand. So the next year I moved it to Las Trampas starting in 2019, and we stayed there for 5 or 6 years. Both sites, the habitat is oak bay woodland with little to no understory, so fairly open. And there's no recent burn history in either park. I opened the Pepperwood Preserve site up in northern Santa Rosa in 2024. Using the same permits, I was able to operate in Sonoma County. And just to be able to work at Pepperwood, I just had to complete the Pepperwood research application, and that was approved. The site is near a redwood stand. The habitat is mixed coniferous forest with tan oak dominant, highly dominant, and some black oak, tan oak understory. And that site has burned twice in the last decade. So it burned first in 2017 in the Tubbs fire, and then it burned again in the Kincaid fire in 2019. The site has recovered relatively well, and there is a really healthy undergrowth of mostly tan oak, but there's a few other things in there too, like toyon, and luckily that site does not have poison oak, but it's very, very actively managed by the stewards at Pepperwood. So this map illustrates where the sites have been. So Briones up kind of near Concord, and Las Trampas down closer to San Ramon, and then of course Pepperwood Preserve up in the North Bay area of Santa Rosa. All right, study methods. So how are we catching these little guys? So I'm using mist nets with an audio lure to attract migrant saw-whets, and this is all occurring at night. So an audio lure is a Fox Pro with preloaded saw-whet owl calls. I have a 30-minute track that just plays saw-whet owl, the male saw-whet owl call on repeat. And I'm out at least 4 nights a week from early October to mid-November. And going back to mistnet, for those of you who aren't familiar with a mistnet, it's essentially a big volleyball net with really fine mesh and to capture birds. So if a bird flies in it, then there's a little pocket that it'll land in and kind of rest in until the banders come in and remove them. So I'm out at least 4 nights a week from early October to mid-November. So usually going Thursday through Sunday nights. We operate starting half an hour after sunset and just running for 4 hours. So we have that standard schedule. We check the nets every 30 minutes, unless we're hearing weird sounds at the nets. If we think there's a predator, then we'll come check it. Predators being like great horned owls, or if we suspect like a fox or something else is in the way. Luckily, I've never had an issue with a predator taking an owl out of the nets while we've been banding. Knock on wood, of course. So we moved anything we caught in that 30 minutes. So Saw-whet owls and western screech owls, we banned those 2 species. We take measurements. Those measurements include age, weight, fat, molt limits, feather molt, wing cord, all that important stuff. Presence of parasites, primarily hippoboscid flies, which there's a photo of on this slide. Hippoboscid flies are blood-sucking flies that live their entire life on a bird, and they have a singular piercing mouthpiece that just sucks the blood directly from the bird. And they're very gross, and they move sideways like a crab, and they are very much attracted to fuzzy clothes, beards, and hair. So we usually, if there's a bird that is particularly overloaded with flies, then you can guarantee that you'll find one crawling on you when you're driving home, which is awful. But I don't know, I guess you get used to it. Study method. So aging owls. Aging owls is actually pretty fun and pretty straightforward. These guys have a super cool phenomenon where their wing feathers glow under UV light. So the structural components of the bird's feather glow. They're called porphyrins. So when a hatchier bird grows in all of their flight feathers at once, for the first time before they migrate, so they all grown at the same time, they're all uniform. And so you can expect all of them to grow or to glow bright pink under UV light uniformly. So super cool, super fun to see in the field. But as a bird gets older, it gets a little bit more complicated. So UV light helps. It's a little bit harder to see in the photo that's not UV light, but when you turn the UV light on, you can see where the fresh feathers are. So these bright pink feathers are the newly grown in feathers that have been replaced. The old feathers in the middle are feathers that have worn off all their porphyrins due to UV light, being out in the sun and feather wear. And then you can see all these underwing coverts have been replaced as well. So this bird is a second-year owl. These guys molt their feathers in a particular way, so only their outer primaries and their outer secondaries are replaced as a second-year bird. A little bit harder to see outside of UV light, but you can tell these feathers are a little bit fresher, they're darker, not as sun-worn. And then once you get to third year, you start seeing different patterns. It's a little bit more difficult to tell. Sometimes you can find like a second-year feather in the outer primaries, or 2, like as you can see in this individual. The kind of worn, not as worn as this one middle one that has absolutely no color left. And then you have some tracks of fresh feathers in the middle. Usually we just call after second-year birds after second year because that's the minimum age that we can confidently age it to. Sometimes we get lucky and are able to actually age it to third year, but that's pretty rare. And then again, you can see on the photo that's not under UV light, some of the feathers are much more worn than others. You can see some like dark brown feathers in the secondaries here, and some very, very worn light brown feathers right in the middle. All right, talk about some results. So this photo shows all the results since starting in 2018. So the non-hatched bars represent pooled results from both Briones and Las Trampas. Since those study sites had relatively low capture rates since inception, I went ahead and pooled them, and since they're close together. And then at Pepperwood Preserve is the hatched bars here. So right off the bat, you can see that capture rate of Pepperwood Preserve is much higher than that at Los Trompos and Briones. So we caught around, let's see, I've caught 163 owls total during fall migration between the two sites. 65 at Pepperwood over 2 years, 2024 and 2025, and 98 at Los Trompos and Briones combined over 8 years. Capture rate was consistent at Los Trompos and Briones, about 3.2 owls per 100 net hours. The first 2 years saw the most captures, but the rate stayed pretty steady after that with respect to number of owls caught annually. Interestingly, in 2023, we caught no after hatch year owls. So only hatch year birds migrating for the first time. So orange represents after hatch year birds, blue represents hatch year birds. The following year was mostly after hatch year. Comparatively, capture rates at Pepperwood were much higher with similar effort. So, going back to 4 hours per night, number of nights was about the same, but we caught about 9 owls per 100 net owls there. This chart shows sex ratio of all the owls captured. Most of the owl captures are female, and it's almost equal across both sites, even though but remember, Pepperwood's only been open for 2 seasons, and Briones and Los Trompos were open the combined 8 seasons. Very few males are captured in general, indicated by the the orange line here. But this is pretty typical of Saw-whet owl banding, as males are more likely to be short distance migrants or stay on their territory year round to defend it. And then almost even with the number of unknown owls captured. So just a bird that their wing chord and weight measurement kind of put them in the middle between male and female. Interestingly, a new paper came out this year that was able to more accurately assign sex to captured owls than the chart that is currently accepted by the bird banding lab. It came out last month, so I haven't yet reviewed and reassigned unknown sexes of owls that I captured, but I plan on doing that. And I guess the rate is the formula that you use is actually able to assign it with like 96% confidence and almost eliminate unknown birds. So I'm looking forward to kind of re-diving into that data and analyzing and seeing if the male ratio is actually much higher than we initially thought across the board. It hasn't been accepted by the bird banding lab yet as like a method to sex owls yet, but I'm sure it will be since it was backed up with genetics. Okay, so this chart shows one of my questions: does increased effort lead to increased owl captures? And it's kind of hard to tell, but generally, the answer is no. So you can see the blue indicates Los Trompos Briones sites, and there were years where we had over 400 net hours, but that didn't necessarily mean that we caught more owls. And so, a few years we had around 200 net hours, but still caught consistent amount when there was double the effort. Alternatively, at Pepperwood Preserve, we catch a lot more owls there in general, indicating that site might be more of a migration corridor than the East Bay Park sites in the East Bay. Some of the highest net hour efforts were put in without increased captures. So pretty frustrating when you're in the field and you're out there 4 nights a week, you don't catch anything for like 10 days straight, but it's part of science. So negative results are still results. Okay, this chart, it's a lot to look at, and I apologize for that, but bear with me. So this chart shows the first and last day of banding, essentially all time. So for the earliest date we banded was October 2nd, and the latest date we've banded was November 21st. The hashed lines show Pepperwood Preserve owls, and the unhashed lines again show Los Trompos and Briones owls. So basically, I wanted to see when owls were arriving. And so you can see from this chart, there's two peaks of when we see the most owls incoming during the banding season. So around October 18th, we see a peak here with high owl captures. So if someone wanted to come out and see an owl, I'd say come on October 18th or the week of October 18th. And again, we can look in early November and say the same, but I would recommend people maybe go to the Los Trompas and Brioni site. So we'll talk about that in a second. And these are all the owls that were ever caught on this chart here. Okay. So this chart looks at Pepperwood Preserve only, hatch year and age of when owls showed up. So this bird shows that hatcher birds tended to show up a little bit later, and after hatcher birds migrated earlier. But there's only 2 years of data again, so you gotta consider that. Migration also falls off a sharp cliff at the end of November, and we don't catch anything after November. I guess, 2 years of data, but we haven't caught anything past November 10th, even though we've tried to stay open and catch them. The window at Pepperwood is likely narrower to catch owls because it's more of a migration corridor and not a wintering site. However, birds were found to arrive between 6 and 7 days earlier on average than the Los Trompas Brioni site. So show up earlier and leave earlier. So maybe just a migration site. This could be also partially be attributed to the difference in latitude. So Pepperwood Preserve is quite a bit higher in latitude than Los Trompas and Briones. So, that would make sense if the birds are going in a north-south direction, they would hit Pepperwood first before going down to the East Bay. All right, this is the same kind of data again, but for Los Trompas Briones. Again, 1018 is this magical day. For whatever reason, the most owl captures were captured on the 18th. But this also shows that after hatcher birds are arriving a lot sooner, by about a week. So that's indicated by the orange, and hatcher birds are migrating a bit later. And then another thing I looked at was is weight of the bird changing over the course of the season. So interesting, significant finding was that owls at Los Trompas and Briones were heavier over the course of the season, while at Pepperwood they got lighter. This implication is that Pepperwood is not necessarily a wintering site, but East Bay parklands in the East Bay are. And owls are staying longer there and gaining weight, while as Pepperwood, they're actively migrating and they're losing weight since they're not really staying on site to hunt. They kind of maybe stop, get banded, and continue on their way is kind of the thought. Note that the chart is smooth to highlight the trends and doesn't show individual data points, but there was statistical significance to show that owls were getting heavier in the East Bay, but lighter at Pepperwood, and I thought that was really interesting. But of course, I would like to have more data to show a stronger trend. All right, and finally, some of the fun data that we've collected. So we've had 3 of our owls banded at Los Trompas get recaptured elsewhere, and we caught 1 owl that was banded elsewhere. So all of those owls were, so all of the owls that we had banded at East Bay Parks at Los Trompas, they were all banded on a different year, but they were all recaptured in almost the same span of like a couple of weeks in 2022. So 1 owl that was banded in 2019 as a second year female was recaptured up near Chico at the Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve. Was rebanded 3 years later. So she was at least 5 years old when she was recaptured, which is pretty amazing. We didn't get a recapture weight on her. We had an owl that was banded in 2020 as an unknown get recaptured up in Blue Lake, California, which is near Arcata, in 2022 as an afterhatch year. So she was at least 3 years old. And then an owl banded in 2021, banded as a hatch year, recaptured again in 2022, again at least 3 years old, up near Arcata. So that was a fun month, essentially, in 2022 to get all these notifications that our owls were recaptured. This banding site, Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve up in Chico, last year banded an owl on October 12th as a hatch year, and we re-caught her on the 17th, 5 days later, at Pepperwood Preserve. So that was a lot of fun, getting our first foreign recapture from another site. And just to note, Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve, the site up in Forest Ranch near Chico, has had 5 foreign recaptures in 19 years of operation. They've had owls from Montana, 2 owls from British Columbia, an owl from Iowa, and an owl from us at Las Trampas. And then only 2 of their owls have ever been recaptured in 19 years. So one was recaptured in British Columbia. I don't have the date information for that. And then the one that they recaptured from us this should be Las Trampas. Oops, I'm stupid. Okay, I guess I'm done with that slide. So this map illustrates where our sites are in relation to those other sites in Northern California. So between Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve up near Forest Ranch, just north of Chico, it's about 100 miles direct between that site and Pepperwood Preserve, between that site and Las Trampas, it's 140 miles. So the owl last year that we recaught from them traveled 100 miles in 5 days, so about 20 miles a day in migration. Of course, we don't know if they did that trip all in one night or took 5 nights to do it. And then the other owl captures, one up in Blue Lake, between Blue Lake and Las Trampas. That's about 237 miles direct. But of course, those were multiple year difference. So we're not sure where the owls went between banding in the fall and then being recaptured a few years later. Maybe they, traveled north up the coast, bred up in Washington, Oregon, maybe even further north, and then migrated down the same route. We have no idea. We're hoping to learn more about their migration specifically very soon, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. We can't talk about saw-whet banding at night without talking about what other fun things we see while we're out there. We catch bats. We catch about 1 or 2 a season. The most common bat we catch is a pallid bat, and a little brown bat we caught down at Las Trampas one year. That's what the bat picture is on the slide. Very tiny, very cute, very bitey. Pallid bats are always very bitey too. They tend to try to bite themselves out of the net and end up making a big hole, which is a bummer for us because that means we got to do repairs. We catch at least 1 or 2 western screech owls per season. That's what these photos are. These guys are the most chill birds. In comparison, saw-whets are very bitey, grabby. They fight you. You get lots of scratches from them. If we open too early, before it's totally dark, we'll often catch songbirds that are down in the brush. So we've caught like a few hermit thrushes, we've caught some spotted towies, and we just release those from the net and they don't get banded. Other notable observations that we've had while we've been out at night, lots of feral pigs out in East Bay parks, cows, luckily none of those guys running through our nets at night, barn owls, common nighthawks, lots of great horned owls. At the Pepperwood site, we have northern pygmy owls. We have a pair that goes off at about sunset while we're setting up nets every time we're out there, so that's a lot of fun. We had a northern spotted owl show up one night and grace us with their 4-note calls while we were setting up. And that was pretty incredible, since it was thought that was a juvenile individual based on its call. Was kind of not as refined as an adult spotted owl call. And then lots of California toads and lots of newts out at Pepperwood as well. So the drive out of Pepperwood is usually pretty slow because the newts and toads come out in full force at night on the road. All right, so some study takeaways. The Bay Area serves as an important migratory pathway for saw-whet owls, especially since relative to other sites back east that catch like hundreds of owls in a season. We catch a few dozen per year, but we have a pretty high recapture rate relative to those guys and relative to the site up in Chico, who's only had, two of their birds be recaptured in 19 years, which I think is pretty crazy. That also just shows that there needs to be more banding sites, because like we still don't know where these owls go. Each season and each site is highly variable in capture rates. I think a lot of that has to do with other stuff going on, like fires. There were a few years during banding in the fall where there were some big fires, like the big fire up in Paradise in 2018 ended our season early, the campfire. So we had a lot of wildfire smoke that week. So it was just being hazardous to stay out at night and sit in the smoke, so we ended early that season. And that's probably also affecting breeding in the mountains too, like hundreds of thousands of acres of land are being burned. It's probably devastating to the wildlife there, including owls. So it would be interesting to look at data for those big wildfire years and see if that's affected population size. Based on recapture data, owls are staying during stopover and likely spending winter in the Bay Area too. So we only get like a couple of local recaptures at each site during banding. So at Pepperwood, we've only had like 1 or 2 owls so far. Of course, we've only been to open 2 years, but we've caught owls that were banding at that site before. But my sense is that they don't really stick around too much at that site. At Los Trompas, we have a much higher recapture rate. So also, more evidence that they're spending longer there and using that site more as a wintering site than a stopover site. Of course, you can't do research when you ask questions that doesn't lead to more questions. So, the more you find out, the more you want to know. So we know saw-whet owls breed here in the Bay Area, but are they migratory? Or they stay here, full time? Where do these owls go? So if anyone ever hears about saw-whet owls nesting in the Bay Area in a nest box or somewhere else, like I would love to hear about it, band them, and that's more data points on the map as far as like banded birds go. So if they're ever recovered, then, we know where they came from and where they went. And that leads into future research and goals. So I'm in the process of establishing a 3rd owl banding station in Marin County at the Martin Griffin Preserve in Bolinas in cooperation with All Hands Ecology, formerly Audubon Canyon Ranch. The site at Los Trompas and Briones is officially moving to Reinhardt Redwood Regional Park in Oakland this fall. And the thought there is that it's closer to the coast, so it might be closer to a migratory pathway, and we're hoping to increase those capture numbers from 8 or 10 a season to hopefully double that. Plus we know that they breed in that area as well from eBird records. We're going to continue to contribute to long-term data sets for the region. So continuing banding, at both Pepperwood and Reinhardt Redwood full-time, at least 4 nights a week. The Marin County site is probably going to be just once or twice a week, and then just kind of gear up or ramp up from there and adding more nights as we get more banded folks who are able to lead those nights. I do want to continue doing public outreach. So with Mount Diablo Bird Alliance, we've hosted small field trips in the past. 5 or fewer folks coming out and seeing what owl banding is all about. Continue with volunteer outreach. So I do have a network of probably over 75 volunteers between the 2 sites at Pepperwood and in the East Bay. And so those folks are learning lots about birds, bird banding, ecology of owls. Really great volunteer experience for folks to add to the resumes. And then in the future, I'm going to be working with a graduate student to do modus tagging on owls. And so we're hoping to start that research this fall. Definitely will be doing it next year, if not sooner. So I'm going to take a minute to talk about MODIS tagging. For those of you who haven't heard of it before, it's an international collaborative research network that uses automated radio telemetry to track the movement and behavior of small animals, such as birds, bats, and insects. MODIS is a program of Birds Canada in partnership with collaborating researchers and organizations. MODIS stations are installed in strategic locations around the world to collect data on animal behavior and movement. MODIS stations can be deployed in a wide variety of environments with clear line of sight. Antennas can detect animals in flight within 15 or 20 kilometers. So if a tagged owl or other bird or other species, even like monarch butterflies, can have little geotags on them now, fly within line of sight of one of these towers, it'll ping and alert the researcher know that one of their animals was in range, and they'll know exactly where that bird or where that creature was. So super cool information. You don't have to be out driving around with a telemetry receiver and try to find your birds anymore, which is actually what I did in graduate school. I didn't talk about that, but it makes putting out these large number of transmitters and being able to collect the data that much easier, and just gives us so much information since the MODIS network is actually getting pretty large. They can provide high temporal and geographic precision over multiple spatial scales. So just so much more data than, recapture data at a banding site. This is just a screen grab of all the sites in the Bay Area. So as you can see, there's a lot. Some of them are set to like specific frequencies. So like the tags that are deployed have to be within a specific range to be detected, or they can be like multi-mode or tri-mode. So, that makes a higher, it's a higher allowance, to be able to detect more types of animals basically, and not just like a narrow frequency. So it'll be more, have a better range to pick up different things. There are MODIS towers in place at Martin Griffin Preserve. There's one planned to be installed this month at Pepperwood, actually. And then potentially additional towers will be added at Mount Diablo and other sites across the East Bay. And I know Mount Diablo Bird Alliance has been talking to folks about getting funding to add and maintain a tower out there. So that would be even more data. Stations around the Bay Area will detect animals with tags if it's within the same frequency range as the receiver. The owls that will be tagging, they're going to either have a leg harness or like a backpack style harness, following a commonly used design that has been published by Biles in 2013. The transmitters will not exceed 3% of the body weight. That's kind of the mass that's recommended that an owl will carry without it affecting their ability to fly. And the goal is to learn where the owls go after being tagged. So this is just a screenshot of sites in the Bay Area, but if you were to go to the MODIS website and zoom out, you'll see that there's literally hundreds of stations all over North America. So if an owl goes in any direction, essentially we'd be able to pick up where it is. So yeah, so here's all the sites where northern saw-whet owls have been detected via MODIS stations in North America. There are 18 projects currently that have tagged 977 saw-whets across North America, and 628 visitations by those birds. So some owls never get detected on a MODIS station, and that could be because they get predated or they just go somewhere where there's not a station, right? And you can see all the dark dots on this map that are stations that haven't picked up a saw-whet. But you can see that there's a dot in the Bay Area that's actually in Point Reyes area of an owl that was banded in Indiana in 2021 and was picked up I believe in 2024. So that was probably a surprise to the researchers in Indiana when their owl showed up on the coast of California. But you can look up that owl on the MODIS site and see where it went. I think this might have been the only place it was detected. There was another owl that was detected down in San Diego. This owl visited a bunch of sites. It was pretty interesting to see, and it was a multi-year detection. So it was tagged in 2024 and detected in June of this year in San Diego. And it since went back east, which is super interesting to me since that means it flew over the desert. But we're learning so much about these little guys already. All right. With that, that concludes my presentation. So I want to thank Bay Nature for allowing this opportunity to talk to everyone about saw-whet owls. Thank you to East Bay Regional Park District for allowing us to band for 8+ years on their property. Pepperwood Preserve has also been a great land steward and host to us, and let us drive around at night out on their property. And then, of course, Mount Diablo Bird Alliance has been a wonderful organization, helping us get new gear when we need it, supporting new nets, and providing us with volunteers and shout outs. If you're interested in visiting the station, volunteering, collaborating, donating towards our MODIS effort, you can contact me at my email address there. So thank you, everyone.
Outstanding. Julie, thanks so much for sharing so much about these wonderful owls and the findings from your research efforts. It's time now. We've got a tremendous number of great questions in the chat. As I give you a quick second to catch your breath, grab a sip of water if you like. I'd like to invite everyone who's with us this afternoon. If you'd like, please turn your cameras on so that we can see you, so that when you ask your question, that Julie can see you and hear you as well. And we'll jump right in. I've got a whole list of questions I want to ask myself, but I want to give the audience, the community, the first chance. Julie, there are a lot of questions in the chat about getting involved in your work. And Robin Doolin, are you available? I'd like to bring you on to ask your question about getting involved.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I have construction going on in my house, so it's quite loud. So I apologize about that. But yeah, I have experience with surveying bats, and I have experience with surveying sage-grouse and waterfowl and some other species as well. I am in between undergraduate and grad school, and I'm just looking to gain more experience in whatever capacity I can. And so I just wanted to find out how I could volunteer. I'm really eager to do that either this year or next year. And I saw that you gave your email though at the end of the presentation, so that's probably the way to do it. So, but yeah, that was my question, and then what I wanted to jump in with.
Yeah, wonderful. Love the enthusiasm. You can send me an email at my email address. I can also put it in the chat as well for folks to write down. But yeah, send me an email. We'll chat offline, and I'll give you some information about joining the project.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Julie, to build on that question, what are the types of activities that you typically have volunteers performing?
Usually we do a site cleanup at the beginning of the season. So a date where we go to the banding site, clean up branches that have fallen since the year. We rake net lanes. Sometimes we got to move a rock or two. And then we set the rebar to be able to put the nets on the poles for the season. So a little bit of physical activity. And then at one of the East Bay Park site, we have a big box that we stash with all the equipment, since the lead bander changes usually between outings. And so we store everything on site in a big lockbox that's kind of hidden. And so kind of carrying all that and setting it up would be the first thing. The day-to-day during the banding, that includes just mist net setup and takedown and extraction, helping with data collection. And then you get some hands-on experience with either releasing owls and practicing taking data and measurements. If we have field trips, usually there's a person assigned as the field trip liaison who welcomes the visitors, talks to them about the project, walks them from the parking lot to the site. And then the banders usually take over from there. So they're little tasks, but it's very helpful to have, other people doing that. So everything can get done smoothly.
Sounds great. We have reports of a couple of sightings here in the chat. Linda Valley shared that she had an aunt in Vancouver who found a sleeping owl in her Christmas tree that she brought home from a tree
Oh,
farm.
wow.
And then Becky Flanagan shares that she found one, a friend found one in a wreath in Bend, Oregon. So holiday times. Becky,
So lucky.
if you're with us, you had a couple of questions about the Modus transmitters and cameras. Would you like to unmute and ask your question to Julie?
Yes, I believe my question was about the Modus transmitters was, are those like available for private use and um are they really expensive? I mean, I don't know how big they are. Like, are they like ginormous or are they like small?
From what I haven't really been too involved on like the setup of Modus Tower, but I've heard estimates that it's between like $15,000 and $20,000 to like get a tower and install it and maintain it. I'm not sure what maintenance entails, probably just, making sure it's not corroding, that like wires and stuff are still connected and that it's transmitting properly. So that's like set up for like a tower, but tags run about, I think, $700 to $1,000 each. It depends on this. It depends on the size, depends on the species, depends on the frequency you want to use. So if you want to use something that's giving out like constant pulses and you can find it, then that makes the battery need to be larger, which increases the size and makes it a little bit more expensive. There's lots of different tags, there's lots of different sizes and different configurations. So we haven't like finalized what we're working on yet. We're working with the grad student I'm working with. He's working with UC Davis to get all these transmitters. And so it's a grant program that they have. And so we're kind of going to get what they have available for us, which I believe is like a set frequency and size, but it will be compatible with Saw-whet owls.
All right, so that's not really for public consumption if they're $20,000. I just asked because I live on the edge of a canyon. And so, if it was something that could be like, I could put up a pole, that
Yeah.
would work. I mean, that would be kind of fun just to do in retirement.
There is like a California Department of Fish and Wildlife person who's kind of, I guess you could say, in charge of like Modus and telemetry for the state. Um, you might be able to find something online, like on the department website, that has like grants available if you are interested in siting or like, having your land be a site for a Modus tower.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Fred Booker asked a short question that I'll jump in and ask. He's curious, how is the owl age determined?
The age is determined by the molt limit of the flight feathers. And so if you remember the photo I showed with the UV light showing the owl's wing glowing like bright pink, if the owl's wing is fully bright pink, that means it's a hatch year. All of the feathers were grown in at the same time, so they glow uniformly bright pink because they still have all their porphyrins, which is like the structural cells in the feathers that glow under UV light. So as the owls age, those porphyrins get worn off the feathers by like sun damage and wear. And so when they grow their fresh feathers in, they grow it in a specific pattern where a second year bird will only replace their outer flight feathers. So those ones will glow bright pink versus in between those feathers, they'll be worn down and not replaced. So you're able to confidently age a bird to a second year. Once it gets past the second year, it gets a little bit trickier, as I mentioned in the talk, but sometimes you are able to accurately age to third year and beyond. But you have to be very confident and very like familiar with molt limits of those guys.
Awesome. There's a lot of fascination among the group around issues around recapture and resighting of these birds. Michelle, you just dropped a really great question in the chat. I'm going to ask you to come on and ask your question to Julie about the banding and the behavioral changes that might cause.
Hey there, guys. I really appreciate this talk. I jumped in kind of late, but very interesting topic. I was just curious, does banding year after year at the same site possibly cause behavioral changes in future possible? I don't know if there's any way to know this, but for future migrations that go through there? Maybe there's a shared owl knowledge that's passed down. Don't go there because they banned you or something like that.
That's a great question. I don't think so, because the species is thought to be nomadic, and we catch very, very few recaptures between years. Like, I think we've maybe had 3 between year recaptures of like 363 birds total we've captured. So, we think that they kind of migrate through the area and then they go on to wherever their final destination is, and they choose a different path, the next year, the next migration season. And so there wouldn't really be an opportunity for them to have their behavior changes. But they do that kind of all across the board. So where very few stations catch a lot of recaptures. There's a whole paper about saw-whets suggesting that they're nomadic. A study, I believe in Idaho, banded, it was either 200 or 400 nestlings from this big nest fox program in one season, and one was recaptured at the same site in a subsequent year. Out of like all those hatchlings and adults that were banded, one returned. So, you'd think they'd have some nest site fidelity. Like flammulated owls have very high fidelity, but saw-whets don't. So, they never found out where all their owls went, or at least it wasn't published in that paper. But that's pretty strong evidence that they're more nomadic than we think. And, looking at some of the MODIS data on those maps, and that's all public information. If you go to the MODIS site, you can see some of the routes these guys are taking, and it seems super random. So that's really fun to look at. So maybe we'll find out that like our owls don't follow a pattern. It's all just as random as it can be, and that's good to know too.
So as we approach the top of the hour, I think we've got time for 2 more questions. I'd like to give the first opportunity to Dale Steele, who I'll ask to come on screen here. Wildfire is always a topic close at hand for us. And Dale, you've got a question about owls and wildfire.
Yeah, great presentation, Julie. Thank you for that. My question is really a general one. Do you feel like you have enough data to see any changes or reactions to owls by all the increased fire activity that we're having in the Bay Area and beyond? I know it's a pretty generic question, but I'd be really interested in what you're seeing. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't had like a big fire in our area, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, in the last couple of years, thankfully. But there's been lots of mega fires like in 2020, 2021 with like the Dixie fire. I think I could, I guess, talk to my collaborators who have a station up at Forest Ranch at Big Chico Ecological Reserve, because they're right down canyon from some of those big fires. And indeed, like the park fire that was just a couple years ago, it totally decimated their banding site actually, but they still had owls migrating, even though like the banding site had totally burned over. Even like the barn where they store equipment, luckily I think their equipment wasn't there at the time, so they didn't lose anything, but that whole site was totally devastated. But they still banded and they still caught owls, maybe about like a third of the owls that they usually catch because there wasn't cover. But the birds still migrate. So, to me, that indicates maybe they're coming from a lot further than we think they're coming from. But I would expect like, fires regionally would affect like breeding success, right? Like, especially if they're like in the summer when fledglings are dispersing for the first time. But I don't know, it seems to me like a lot of time the pattern is like big fires happening in the fall after a lot of birds have already fledged. So hopefully the birds are able to like kind of escape and survive, but it's hard to say. There's just like not enough data, not enough owl banding stations across the state. And there hasn't really been a good opportunity to study saw-whets, in direct proportion to like these fire responses, at least not in the Bay Area. But, that site up in Chico probably has some really good post-fire data now, since they never stopped banding operations, even like after the Camp Fire and all those big ones that they've had.
Right. I'm going to wrap up with 3 short questions that hopefully come together in a nice closing. There's curiosity about, even as they're nomadic, whether the birds exhibit any territorial behavior. And related, do they have any predators?
Yes, I would imagine that the owls are territorial. So I think I mentioned before, yeah, the males are thought to stay on their territory more year round instead of migrating seasonally, like such as the females do. And so yes, they will defend their nest cavities from other males. And they'll also have multiple females that they bond with, and not just like one pair. And they're not, they don't bond like for life like spotted owls do, and a lot, other species do. So they'll have different partners every year, and that's probably just like part of their nomadic nature. And as for other predators, yes, anything larger than them will eat them. So barred owls are big time predators, especially back east and up in the Pacific Northwest, where there's like the big barred owl, invasive problem. Our research partners up in British Columbia and up in Washington have many issues with barred owls, where they have to like catch them and relocate them, and then they come back 2 nights later. So I think what they end up doing is like holding on to them for the night and then releasing them and then repeating the same thing. So barred owls are a big issue, and they essentially, when they hear like a saw-whet call go off, during audio lure at night, it's basically a dinner bell for them. So I'm adding my email in the chat. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me, you're able to do that via email.
Wonderful. Well, that's a great way to bring us to the conclusion of our hour together. I know we're all filled with appreciation for everything that you've shared with us this afternoon, Julie. We've got this great tradition on our Bay Nature Talks where we all offer a big thank you as a send-off. So I wonder if I can ask everyone on the line to please unmute yourselves, turn your cameras on. And then we'll give that big Bay Nature thank you to Julie here in a moment. So come on screen. I'll give everyone a moment. Excellent. It's wonderful to see everybody. And then on the count of three, everyone will just give a big thank you to Julie. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Thank
Julie.
you.
Good to see
Thank
you.
you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We really appreciate you, Julie. And to everyone on the line, thank you for joining us this afternoon to learn about the saw-whet owl. We'll see you soon for the next Bay Nature Talk. If you check our Bay Nature events calendar online, you'll see that we have a full schedule planned, and we'll look forward to the next time that we all get together. In the meantime, have a great afternoon. Julie, thank you again for sharing your time and expertise with us, and we'll look forward to the next opportunity to get together. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.